to our first point of discussion today. Now, the growth of Nigeria's tech ecosystem has been rapid in the last few years due to many startups that have hit unicorn startups. Now, but growth in the sector is still being impeded by political interference, lack of infrastructure, and regulatory complexities. In order to bring a lasting solution to these challenges, the federal government, with a group of key stakeholders, drafted the Nigerian Startup Bill. The bill is aimed at solving some of the major issues faced by startups and regulators in the economy and help bring more stability to the ecosystem. The bill also aims to ensure that all government agencies and parastatals are aligned on the vision for the Nigerian tech startup ecosystem. The bill is also an opportunity to update existing but outdated laws despite the mistrust that typically exists between the government and the private sector. The Nigerian Startup Bill provides an opportunity for these two groups to align on the collective national interest. Well, joining me now live from our Abuja studios to understand the proposed tech startup bill is a partner at AELEX, Mr. Davidson Oturu. Good afternoon, Mr. Oturu. It's really good to see you.
Hi, Tulu Lokbe. How are you doing?
Very well.
Great to be here.
Very well. Thank you so very much. Now, the Nigerian Startup Bill is a joint initiative by Nigerian tech startups and, of course, ecosystem and the presidency to harness the potential of our digital economy through co-created regulations. Now, what does this really mean? Take us through what it means, what it portends. They're calling it a big tent approach. Take us through what this means to say the NBS is taking a big tent approach.
All right. Thank you, Tulu Lokbe, for that question. So what you need to understand is that typically a lot of bills that are created in Nigeria, you probably have it going either as an executive bill or the legislature decides that let them pass a bill, that will affect Nigerians. But the big tent approach that has been adopted in this means that a lot of players are involved in drafting this bill. You have the government on one side being spearheaded by the presidency. You have the private sector. You have the ecosystem players, You have the startups themselves. You have the regulators, the government agencies, the MDAs being involved as well in scoping this bill and determining how it would work. Because the most important thing about this bill is making it work. It's one thing to have a bill, a very nice bill that looks lovely and excellent, but making it work is what matters. And that's why the Big Tent approach is being adopted, whereby everybody can own this bill and say, we had a say in what went into this bill, we spoke, we determined how it would work, and now it has to work. So that's the Big Tent approach that has been adopted in all of this.
Now, what are the major objectives of this bill? We know recently of the PIA and all that we talked about. The PIA, that's the Petroleum Industrial Act. Now, it was a bill before it became an act, obviously. Now, tell us the major objectives of this very one.
Thank you. So, if you look at the startup ecosystem, you will see that there are a lot of activities taking place, right? You mentioned unicorns springing all over the place. It looks like it's an amazing space to be in. But if you really drill down and look at the challenges that startups face, you would realize that not every startup has an enabling environment that allows it to grow and to thrive. I'll give you an example. So I'm trying not to sound controversial, but for folks who are probably involved in cryptocurrency, one day they're flying high, Bitcoin is valued, at over 50,000 US dollars. And then the next day, the CBN comes out with a regulation that seemingly affects their source of livelihood. You will then have people dealing with foreign shares, and then you have Nigerians investing because they feel that Google stocks, Apple stocks are in vogue. They're investing in that. And then the SEC brings out a regulation and says you can no longer trade in foreign shares, and they seek to close down or shut down some of these portals. Same thing too, you have neobanks or digital banks. There's no law for them or regulation. They decide to use existing frameworks and then maybe the CBN comes out and says there's something wrong. So part of what we seek with the bill is to have regulatory certainty. Let startups know what to expect, within that legal framework. Let them be aware that these are the laws that exist. Let them not suddenly wake up and realize that they have no business continuity at the end of the day, simply because the government decided that they needed to tweak a few things. And that's part of the big tent approach, because now the government is involved, and we're looking at a situation where before some of these archaic or draconic regulations come out, the ecosystem is able to have a say. The overarching body that seeks to implement the bill would also say, wait, let's have that conversation. Let's discuss around this before any such regulation or law can be implemented. That's part of what we're seeing in the bill. You also have the situation where we're talking about local content. So we want the local businesses to thrive. We want the local investors and foreign investors to have a level of certainty around their investments. You have angel investors as well, private equity funds that are investing. Let them be able to understand that they can bring in their investments, and for those who are desirous of taking it out of Nigeria, there is ease of that. We're also looking at ease of doing business for these startups. If they want to register their companies, for instance, if they want to list on the stock exchange, if they want to repatriate funds, let there be that ease around these things. We're looking at having a platform where the government and the private sector every quarter would be able to have discussions around the ecosystem and how to make it grow and how to move it forward. These are just a few things that you will find within the bill in itself.
Let's move forward, because I wanted to stay so much on enhancing regulatory certainty for startups, because in specifics, but I think you've touched on that. That's talking about how NBS will lead to regulatory certainty in the tech industry. But the tech ecosystem is now collaborating with government that some will say has over time shown little regard for its input in critical decisions. Now, why would they treat the NSB any differently? What do you think?
Well, that's a good question, and it's perfectly understandable. After all, this is Nigeria. Now, what we're looking at, and I'll try not to give so much away from within this bill, but what you need to understand is we're looking at there being a council, which is a body that will seek to implement the Nigerian Startup Bill when it becomes an act. Of course, Mr. President will form part of that body, and then key departments and agencies of government. But you would also have private sector individuals as well involved in that process. Now, this is critical, right? Because, and it's usually a case of, give and take. The government wants to give, but at the same time, they are worried, they are concerned that we're not giving too much. Now, by having the private sector players on that council, those kind of conversations can be had, and they discussed around it, and they say, yes, these are the sort of regulations that need to come out to make the environment have a level of certainty. So I'll give you an example. The government is probably thinking, oh, let's tax startups because, they seem to be raising so much money. I just read that Flutterwave, it is going triple unicorn. They're valued at 3 billion. We need to tax them. But for the private sector folks who are on that council, they'll be able to explain to the government that, look, the fact that somebody is raising doesn't mean that they've even broken even, and they'll be able to break down those dynamics for them. And then the government will now say, okay, if that's what it means, how can we even enable these guys to break even? And then the right sort of regulations can then be released to serve as an enabler for the ecosystem rather than taking them back by several steps. So that's what would happen with the NSB. It's not going to be business as usual. I understand you, and there could be that criticism that there are so many laws that exist, there are so many things that are already happening. This time around, the private sector would have a say in what happens, God willing.
I also like to ask, because while reading through, preparing for this discussion with you, I stumbled on the NIDA bill. So I'm asking, is the NSB the same as the leaked NIDA bill? What's the difference if it's not the same?
Well, again, Tolu, you seem to be asking the right types of questions, because some people have actually accosted me that why am I involved in drafting the NIDA bill? So they are two different documents. They are two different laws. So NIDA has already existed since 2007, and they've had their act. Yes, NIDA does attend to tech-enabled startups, but as that agency, they are what they do affects the general tech ecosystem. It's a completely different bill. It had existed as an act. They're seeking to amend that act, with the amendment bill, so that they can bring some additional provisions into the NIDA bill. But the Nigerian Startup Bill is a fresh bill in itself, right, that attends to tech-enabled startups and has different things in there that seek to grow startups rather than inhibit them. So in the Startup Bill, for instance, you wouldn't see provisions that seek to tax startups. No, that's not what that bill seeks to do. In the bill, you would see something like an investment fund, for early stage startups, trying to grow them, trying to grow the ecosystem, trying to enable, like I've emphasized time and time again. So there are two completely different bills with different objectives. I would say this, though, that in the Startup Bill, NIDA does play a role there, again, because of what they are set up to do, but they are not the driving force behind the Nigerian Startup Bill. The Nigerian Startup Bill is a co-created law that has the private sector on one side and the presidency on the other, and other ecosystem players that are seeking to make the ecosystem work the way that it should.
Interesting. Now, how are you also sure that the legislature, of course, and other arms of government will support it? I don't want to cite what we faced when we're looking at the PIA. How many years we spent on that. How soon do you think, what do you think would happen with regards to legislature reacting to this?
Well, so what people need to be able to understand is that this bill in itself will grow the Nigerian economy. Make no mistake about that. This bill in itself will allow the system to work, because it's not seeking to affect players who are not bringing value to the system. What it's looking at is where are the tech-enabled startups that have value? Where are the tech-enabled startups that have the right metrics for growth? And is asking, what can we do to make these startups work? Now, listen, while we were preparing this bill, we did look at different jurisdictions in Africa and other parts of the world where startup laws exist. You'll be amazed at what introduction of startup laws have done in those systems. Nigeria is the giant of Africa, right? There is no reason why we should not be at the forefront of moving things forward. There's no reason why we should not be the ones who will be calling the shots in the startup ecosystem in Africa. So what this bill will do, the National Assembly would realize that fact. I want to add that the Minister of Communication and Digital Economy has owned this bill. He has looked at it and he has said this is what Nigeria needs. That bill is now before the Ministry of Justice, and they're looking at it and scoping it within the framework of the existing Nigerian laws. So what I believe would happen is that when it gets to the National Assembly, they will definitely nod their head and say this is what Nigeria needs, because it will take us to the next level.
Take the next level. Now, almost finally, I'm looking at us as journalists and also as Nigerians. What can be done? Because this looks very good. Opening up the space, competition, and of course, empowerment and all of that. Creating jobs is something I would think about at this moment. So what can we also do to support the NBS one way or the other?
All right, so there are different platforms on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. Nigerian Startup Bill. I believe on Instagram it is at Nigerian Startup Bill. Same thing with Facebook as well. There is a website as well. Just Google the Nigerian Startup Bill and you'll be able to get onto that website. You can give your comments, you can give your contributions, you can make a statement around what you want to see within those bills. Hey, you can even make your demands. They may not be met per se, but you can have your say, you can have your voice, you can tweet, you can share it on your social media handles, and when it gets to the National Assembly, you will be sure that we'll let you know, and you can show up en masse and give your support towards this bill.
Mr. Oturu, before I let you go on the final note, in your own assessment, do you think that Nigerians, even as youths and all of us, are we taking advantage of the opportunities in the ICT space as much as we supposed to do? Look at what the sector is contributing to the GDP. How can we get better?
Yeah, thank you. So you need to be able to understand that our tech ecosystem is still at its early stage. A lot has happened, I would say, over the last 10 years. There is still a lot that needs to be done. The system still needs to be exploited properly. I would say that having lack of the right type of internet connectivity for you to be able to quickly get things done serves as a hindrance. There's a lot that is going on now. There's the Internet of Things, there's artificial intelligence. If you look at Nigeria, there's a dearth of infrastructure, right? So that's why you would find that some of these tech companies, fintech companies, agri-tech companies, and other tech-enabled startups seem to be making an impact, because in the absence of infrastructure, they're able to use technology to scale over a lot of hurdles. But there are still a lot of challenges, which comes from epileptic power supply, lack of broadband connectivity. So people have to power most of these things by themselves. For us to be able to effectively utilize this, we need the government to play its role. We need the Nigerian startup bill to come into play so that tech-enabled startups can take advantage of some of the incentives in that bill, grow themselves, and who knows, maybe in the next 5 years we could have 1,000 unicorns.
It's a very good way to live it. I've been speaking to Mr. Davidson Oturu. He's the partner at AELEX. Thank you very much, shedding more light on the Nigerian startup bill, telling us what this means, and of course how it can help expand the ICT space. Thank you very much. I really do enjoy the rest of your day. We'll keep a tab on this, and we'll surely have you in to talk more about this when there's need.
Thank you, Tolu Lokpe. Do have a pleasant day as well.